we'll get the thumbs up. Maybe Zach, if you can see. Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you all very much for joining us for another session of our summer webinar series. My name is Jemana, and I'm so very happy to introduce myself as the new chair for the Student Affairs Committee for the Society for Conservation Biology North America, or the SCBNA. For those who might not know what the SCBNA is, it's a regional group of the Global Society for Conservation Biology and is dedicated to advancing the science and practice of conserving biodiversity across North America, supporting students and professionals through networking, mentorship, and skill building opportunities. And we hold conferences in North America every 2 years, the next one being in Milwaukee in 2026. If you're interested in learning more about our society or joining it, you can scan this QR code to check out our website. I'll just hold this screen up here for a couple seconds before I change. So today's webinar is hosted by the Student Affairs Committee of the SCBNA as part of our ongoing commitment to professional development and science communication. The subcommittee seeks to organize activities for students and early career professionals in conservation. And if that sounds enticing and you're an SCBNA member who would like to work with me and the rest of these wonderful folks here on developing student programming, please feel free to send me an email to the address below and we can add you to the email list. Another way to get involved is by contributing to the growing list of student opportunities that include assistantships and fellowships, as well as research opportunities and scholarships that are not reliant on federal funding. So feel free to scan the QR codes to view the list of current opportunities, and you're also available to, or if you're available to add any opportunities that you may be aware of that aren't already listed, feel free to scan that QR code too at the top to contribute any of your ideas. And I can pop the links to these QR codes as well in the chat. In other exciting news, registration is open for the SCBNA's first ever Conservation Education Forum. The Eventbrite link offers more information about this wonderful 2-day training set to take place on August 5th and August 6th, which is coming up very soon. And I can share the link to this event as well in the chat. One final quick message before we get things started. The Student Affairs Committee is working to finalize the details for an upcoming webinar session, so stay tuned for another informative webinar in mid-August or so, and you can keep updated on this session and any other events by checking out SCBNA's website's upcoming events page. So now, without further ado, we are thrilled to welcome Zach Moore. Zach is a conservation biologist and a data analyst who has been working with Wildlife Conservation Society Canada on the Key Biodiversity Areas project since 2022. His previous research focused on grassland birds and ecosystems in Alberta, but has included other invertebrates as well. Zach has contributed to many research projects in different capacities over the past 7 years, including helping with Geographic Information System or GIS administration and data collection. He serves on the board of the SCBNA and also teaches courses in data management and ecosystem restoration at Niagara College in Canada. So thank you all again for being here and welcome, Zach. Let me stop sharing here.
Thanks. Thanks, Jemina. It's nice to be here. I'm going to share the screen now. Okay, and I got to get my Zoom back so I can actually see some of you folks. This one, whole thing. So I'm trying to figure out if I can, okay, that's good. Can you guys do me a favor? I want to see if I can see some of your reactions. I'm hoping that this can be a little bit more interactive than just me staring at a dark screen yelling about Excel into the abyss. So if anyone could use the reactions, I see a thumbs up. Can a couple people put their hands up? Just use that function to throw their hands up. Okay, cool. So I can start to see, yeah, and it shifts around everyone on the screen too. That's awesome. Okay, so you can put your hands down now. You're in the way. Um, what we're going to do today is I'm going to give a brief, maybe 10-minute talk. I think I still have my hand up. Oh no. How do I put my hand down?
The same way you put your hand up, you can lower your hand.
Perfect. Okay. Um, so today's talk is called 10 Excel skills you wish you knew 10 years ago. And it's not just things that I think you might have wished that you'd known, but it's stuff that I wish I knew 10 years ago. And I've been doing data analysis in the environmental field for a few years now. And I'm hoping that some of the tools that I've found can help you. If at the end of this, any of you comes away with at least one or two things that you didn't know before, I'll be a very happy person. And if any of you want to chat more about Excel or data stuff, I'm more than happy, and my email will be at the end of this as well. So let's see if I can do this. The way that today is going to work, hopefully will be more interactive, and we'll spend a little bit of time actually talking about doing a PowerPoint, and then most of the session will just be us trying to work together in Excel. So I am Zach. I go by he, him pronouns. I identify professionally as a conservation biologist and a data analyst. I finished my bachelor's almost 10 years ago now, mostly doing population ecology stuff at the University of Toronto. Can I get thumbs up from people who, if there's anyone from U of T? Oh, nobody from U of T. Oh, one person in the chat. Perfect. Um, I also did a postgraduate certificate at Niagara College in Canada, in ecosystem restoration. Anyone from at Niagara College? No one? And after that, I was able to get a job out in Alberta, helping the Nature Conservancy of Canada do some conservation management work there. So um, once I started that, I ended up falling into a master's kind of in the same area where I was fortunate enough to receive one of NCC's fellowships to do some research there. And so in all of these capacities, I've been working on different types of data analysis, but currently I kind of eat, sleep, and breathe data as part of my daily job. I am a remote worker for Wildlife Conservation Society, where I work on their Key Biodiversity Areas project, which, if you haven't heard of, is pretty cool. We're identifying areas that have kind of these stronghold populations of species that are at risk of extinction across Canada, but it's a global project. So if there's anyone here who's not from Canada, um, you can get some more information about some really cool areas with some cool species if you go there. Aside from working on that job, I work at Niagara College as a part-time instructor teaching data management as well as plant ID, which is my second love behind data and Excel. And as Jimena mentioned, I work with SCBNA as one of the members at large on the board and on the student affairs committee. So if you have any questions about any of these things, again, always happy to chat about stuff. I think this is a student development thing, so there's lots of different tips, especially in the hard times that a lot of you Americans might be going through these days. So maybe getting a Canadian perspective on the field might be interesting. Um, so over the last 10 years or so that I've been working with data, what have I learned? First three things: it's everywhere, it's really useful, and most people tend to hate Excel. Although apparently we had a lot of people sign up for this webinar, so maybe not everyone hates it so much that they're not willing to learn. I don't know. We'll figure that out when we get into it. Another thing is that there are lots of different platforms, languages, and methods by which you can do cool data stuff. You can work in R, you can work in GIS. There's all these different statistical analysis programs. There's your hardcore coding stuff if you want to do Python and C++, and you can even do machine learning with AI, SQL, whatever you want, right? There's all these different things that we can do, but a lot of those are really much less accessible and approachable than Excel. And Excel is used in some way by pretty much every conservation professional. And furthermore, can be used in conjunction with just about everything that we listed above there. All of these different programming softwares, you can get files that feed in that you can edit in Excel. There's all these different things that Excel does to interact with all these different ways that we're analyzing data, even big data. But lots of people, in my opinion, and in my experience, working with people and chatting with students and stuff like that, don't understand a lot of Excel's cool tools. And if you use a lot of these cool tools, you can actually do reproducible research and almost database management type stuff using just Excel, which is really cool because it is so accessible and approachable. But if you don't use some of these cool tools, anyone who's ever gotten an Excel sheet from someone else knows that your work basically becomes a forensic investigation and you're trying to figure out what the hell this person did. And it is really hard to figure it out sometimes. And then it's also really easy to make mistakes and not catch them yourself. I don't know if you even opened one of your old Excel sheets and been like, what did I do here? But using some of the tools that we're going to talk about today, you can hopefully get to a point where you can do some reproducible research. And so in terms of today, I've set up this up so that you can follow along on your own computer when we actually start doing the stuff. Here's the link. I'll put it in the chat again so that you can download some of those documents and be able to work through it. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes more after this, which is a little bit longer than we were hoping for, but I think we'll get through most of the stuff. And this recording will be available on the SCB website. After that, I would really love some interaction. I can see a lot of names. I can see a lot of people from different places, but I would love if anyone could maybe just react when I say so. If everyone could just give me like a heart or something to know that you hear me, or a thumbs up, or I don't know, I saw a rocket emoji in there. That's cool too. Whatever we can get so that it's not just, I know that at least people are still listening and that I'm not going too fast and people are following along. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Stop me, ask questions, tell me to slow down, make fun of me. I don't care when we're in there. Just let's have a little bit of back and forth. I'm used to doing this in a classroom setting where I can walk around to people's computers and make sure they're caught up. But hopefully we could do this in Zoom as long as you guys are willing to let me know that, something is going horribly wrong. Remember when we're doing these things that a lot of these things take practice. You don't try to remember everything that we're doing here, but remember that these are tools that you can look up how to do later. And when you are looking things up, I really like the website Statology, which there's a link for here, or you can just go ahead and Google. But there are hundreds of websites with Excel tutorials. So if you remember, oh, Zach talked about Power Query, but I don't remember exactly how to do it, just Google it and you should be able to find enough information that you're able to get back in there again. And also YouTube videos can't be beat. Quick point, because everyone always asks me when I say I teach data, they're like, what are you doing with AI? And I'm like, nothing with it yet, aside from using it as a tool so that we can use to problem solve. Because a lot of the AI chatbots are really great for problem solving. If you say, how do I do this? It can help you. But if you ask it, analyze this for me, it doesn't quite come out the same way. So we're just not there with it yet. Maybe within a year or 5 years it will be, but I think you still need the basics on a lot of these things for now, and especially for some smaller projects, it's really good to have a lot of these skills, but they do take practice. Last note, Macs lose certain functionality in Excel. Can I have a hands up from everyone who's going to try and do this on a Mac today? Just so I know how many people we're working with. I got one so far, couple of thumbs, maybe another couple people. Yeah, so Macs lose certain functionality. There are certain things that you cannot do in Macs when you're working with Excel, and there are certain things that are just unnecessarily more difficult to do. I usually work with Windows stuff. If you are working on a Mac, there is this page here, which it's available in that downloaded package if you click on this link, or you could just Google keystroke translations between Mac and Windows for Excel. And you could find some pretty good tips about how you might be able to do some of the same stuff, even if I'm not using the same terminology that you are. So who do I think you guys are? I think that everyone in this room is some conservation professional or student with at least some experience in Excel. If you haven't ever done Excel before, this might not be the easiest thing for you to grasp, but I think it will still probably have some information that's pretty relevant for you. So if I could also just get a little show of hands here, how many of you have coding experience? Right, lots of people. Lots of people have coding experience. My thing is that when you're using Excel, if you use a lot of these tools, you can actually have a lot of the same kind of benefits as using coding without actually getting into the the hardcore kind of computer science coding structure or working with a program like R. So there's ways that you could use Excel that makes it so that you can basically code, but in a very approachable way, so it's not too scary to those of you who didn't raise your hands with coding experience. So yeah, I think we'll move forward from there. So these are the 10 skills that I would like us to talk about today. And we are going from data basics in terms of what is a sampling unit, all the way up to some of the more advanced tools in Excel like Power Query. And we're going to kind of work through with some workable examples and then see if we can get through all of the different types of things that I have. But hopefully, at the very least, you can get a couple of, oh, I didn't know that I could do that in Excel. And then that will make me a very happy person. So we're going to start off with a few more minutes of me clamoring on about things, hopefully only like 5 or so, about data management basics. And that's because we really need to understand what it is that we're doing with data in order to understand how we want to organize it to be able to do analysis, right? And so this is kind of a structure that I give to my students a lot to really try and put it into a way that we can understand. And in science or data collection, which I'll kind of use interchangeably, we're largely making observations, right? We are looking at the world and we're going to count stuff. We're going to take measurements of things. We're going to try and come up with descriptions or categorize them. We're going to, and so many other different ways that we could make observations about our world. When it comes to science, we're really talking about replication. And so we take many different observations of something that we consider is we're able to replicate. So we're able to take multiple things and take similar observations about each of those things and maybe see how they differ. And so understanding what is the thing that we're replicating, whether it's an individual, if we're, say, surveying a bunch of people in a population, or if we're sampling a lot of different ecosystems at different sites, if we're using quadrats to understand a forest, what is the thing that you're replicating and how does that relate to your observations? That's the key question that we really need to ask ourselves when we're talking about how to organize the data. And then when we think about what it all means and our ability to put all that together, we're thinking about going from that unit, that sampling unit, the thing that we're replicating into our whole sample, right? Because we're going to go into the world and we're going to only have a finite amount of resources. And so in reality, we're going to have so many sampling units. And that sample that we have is going to be the way that we try and understand the population that we're interested in. And so again, we're going from these observations of things that we're replicating and thinking about what our capacity is to take a sample of a population that we're interested in. And we're always thinking about what is our sample representative of? If I were to survey everyone in this room, is it representative of all of the people in the world? No, probably not, because we don't have all the people who don't want to be in an Excel webinar, because those guys are weird, right? We don't really care about them. But we would have maybe a sample that is representative of the membership at SCB, maybe more specifically, the student membership at SCB. So whenever we have a sample that we have replicated units of and we have observations of, that sample is representative of something. And we need to understand what that is in order to know what are the limits of the interpretations that we can make. And when it comes to trying to make interpretations about these things, there's 2 types of statistics that are important when we come to data. And we usually have descriptive statistics, and that could be, okay, where's the center of our data? Thinking about mean, median, and mode. Or how highly dispersed is it? Like, is there a lot of data that's really far away? Is it really far spread out? Do we have a big range? Or is it all really close to that center unit? And those are what we generally call descriptive statistics. And usually those are where we kind of pool all our observations of our sampling units in order to get some metric about our sample. When we're interested in expanding beyond that sample to the population that we're representing, we use inferential statistics. And that's when we start to make assumptions about how our sample relates to the world. Again, is our sample representative of the entire world, or is it representative of the SCB students? And we start to make assumptions about how these things relate together and make interpretations about the population based on what we've been able to figure out about our sample. And so this is kind of a general framework. There might be some statisticians in the room who look at this and say, that's kind of a little simplification, or maybe this isn't particularly or isn't completely accurate all the time. But this is a good framework with which to think about what is your data and how should you organize it in order to get interpretations out of it. Um, there are really two main types of data that we can work with, and those are quantitative, quantity, numbers, and qualitative data, quality, usually thinking about groupings or text. And so these are important because they lead to my first rule of kind of data management, especially when we're thinking about Excel. And that is if you have one column, have one type of data. If you have dates, have the whole column be dates. If it's an integer or count number, that like one, two, or three species, you can't have half a species, have that be one column. And don't mix the text and the numbers because that ends up really complicating your ability to understand your data and to be able to use some of the more advanced tools that we have available to us to easily make interpretations about it. And so one column, one type of data, first step. We store our data in tables. This is a stock image of a table that I was able to get as part of the PowerPoint design feature. It's not that kind of table. We're going back to the grade 3 kind of tables where we're thinking about rows and columns. Rows go down, columns go across, right? And we have within each of the cells that we're thinking about in that table, we have some types of observations. And the way that our observations fit against our sampling unit kind of depicts what type of table it is that we have. And so we can really have two main types of table. Again, it's a simplification, and we can get all complicated with all sorts of different things. But we have long tables and we have wide tables. And it depends on if your sampling unit, that thing that you're replicating, is really in one row and your observations kind of go across, or if your sampling unit is replicated and you might have just two columns, one that says what is the parameter that you're interested in and what is the number, and then or what is the category or whatever it is, and then what is the category that you're interested in and what is the number below it. So in long data sets, you end up with your sampling unit repeated and observations are within one column. And in wide tables, your sampling unit's usually in one row, and then you have multiple columns for your observations. And so when we're thinking about it, we're coming back to this framework that we're thinking about in terms of how am I going to analyze things. And each of these has their own purpose. The long ones are really great for analysis, and the wide ones are really great if you're, say, collecting data on a piece of paper, or if you're presenting it in a table that you want to present some interesting statistics about, because the long ones are hard to read, but easy to analyze. So the way that they're usually set up is, again, something like this: sampling unit, maybe which variable or column it is that you're, or type of observation it is that you're looking at, and then the observation itself. Whereas wide will go sampling unit, and then have one column for each of the variables. And they end up looking something like this. So we can imagine a really simple example, which is the one that we're going to be working with in Excel today. And you can think about, we administer a survey to, in this case, maybe 20 people. Each of those has an ID, 1 to just 18 there. And then we ask them 20 questions, and they give an answer that's between 1 and 10 for each of those questions. So each of our observations is the answer of the individual to the question, right? So we're getting these nested structures. So in this case, our observations are spread across multiple columns in the wide data set. And in the long data set, all of our observations are in a single column, and we have multiple rows for each one of our sampling units. And that allows us to basically tell Excel or whatever it is that we're working with to group by something like the ID or the question number, and allows you to kind of squirt things up so that you can summarize them. Whereas the wide format allows you to use maybe some of those functions that you're more familiar with in Excel to be able to analyze them a little bit easier. So, with that in mind, the next rule that I have is one sheet, one table. You'll see a lot of people and they do this crazy thing. Like if you've ever seen an accountant's Excel book, it drives me mad because they'll have like one table here and then another one here and then another one below it. And then they'll like sum values from each of these different tables. It's wild. Like you can just, if you structure your sheets with one sheet, one table, and then you use some of these tools, knowing what your structure is, you can actually really facilitate your ability to just automate a lot of that kind of analysis. And so understanding and planning the structure of your data is a really great idea. And I just threw this in here because store your raw data somewhere. If you ever have a data set, always make sure that you have that raw one backed up so that if you do something like delete it or make an edit that you don't need, get rid of it. Or you can go back to whatever it was that you needed to before. So again, just to summarize, long data is better for most Excel tools, and you have kind of your sampling unit in multiple rows. Wide data is better if you're writing functions or if you're presenting data to a bunch of people. And with that, we will now take a minute. Can I have just like some hearts or something if there are people that are actually still in the room and paying attention here? Cool. All right. I love that. That's awesome. Thank you guys. I didn't realize I got this much love just for doing Excel. All right. So I'm going to I'm going to stop the share. No, I'll leave the share. I will stop the slideshow and we will go into Excel here. So we're going to open up the file that is called Excel Skills. So in this one, I have a bunch of files that are in here in this file this one that I've shared with you. You guys can still see the screen, right? Okay, perfect. So there's a bunch of files in here. This is the PowerPoint that I was just working with or doing with you. And just as a note, in case we don't get through everything today, because I tend to be talking more than I need to, there are a lot of, the rest of the presentation is going to be in Excel itself, but there's lots of notes in here about each one of these skills with some screenshots that I painstakingly put together as I was preparing this over the last couple of days. So if you want just a refresher on some of these things, there are some notes in there that you can work from. But let's go ahead and open up this Excel skills book, and then we'll go ahead and get started. If I can get some thumbs up when people are kind of ready there so that we can start to move forward, and it should look something like this. If you guys can still see my whole thing there. All right, cool. Cool, cool. As long as I see some thumbs up from the keeners, I'm going to just assume that everyone's on the same page as me and that we're actually able to make this work. So this is a good practice when you're doing Excel is to have some sort of a README sheet that says what the hell you did, right? To have a little bit of maybe even a date on it, a list of some of the things that you were doing, maybe where you got the data from. And so in here, I just have these list of skills so that I can have it as a reminder of what it is that we want to go back to. So we've already covered these data management basics. And now we're going to cover navigating Excel like a wizard, which is one of my favorite things to do because I like to look cool when I'm doing Excel and pretend that all of my keystrokes make me an actual magician. So if we pull up this wizardry tab that we have here, I've created some instructions. So essentially we start in cell 1 and we're going to follow the instructions all the way through to cell 8 on the other end there. And we're going to work through some really common things that I've seen that people sometimes don't know. If you already know this, then congratulations. You're ahead of some of the curve here. But basically, if we start in this cell 1, one of the most basic ways that we can navigate through Excel, we can use our, arrow keys. We can use the enter to go up and down, right? But some of the ways that are a little bit more cool is if you press the tab key, you can move over a couple of cells. And if you press enter after that, you'll go back to the first column that you started it from. And so if you're doing something like entering data into a bunch of different rows, say in one of those wide tables, then this can be super helpful for you being able to work through things really quickly. So cool. I don't know. How many of you already know how to do that, right? Simple thing. I got one thumbs up of someone who knew how to do that one. So now we're in cell 3. And we've pressed enter to go down. So the next one that we have is you can press control down, and that will essentially take you all the way. If you hold the control key, or I think it's command on the Macs. I apologize for you Mac users. I'm less familiar with them. You might have to play around with them, but they do exist for a lot of these keystroke commands. If you hold control, you can jump between groupings of data. And if you have data that is in a bunch of things, it'll take you all the way to the end. So this is just a good way that you can navigate. Say you got a couple thousand rows of data, you can jump between the top and the bottom really, really easy. You can pair that with the shift key. If you hold control and shift, you can actually highlight all of the cells within whatever range to the next one that you're looking at. And if you hold control shift, so that was just control shift right, and we highlighted all of the cells in between those two values. The next thing that we can do is Control Shift up. And we have this whole grouping of data actually highlighted all at once. And we didn't have to use our mouse. We didn't have to do anything, right? And we were able to get all of these things highlighted. So that's a really great way that we can kind of highlight chunks of data as they're kind of together while we're working in Excel. But this is my new favorite one, which I really, really like. And so now for all you Mac users, I apologize. The keystroke command is weird. It is different, and you will have to look it up. If you're a Windows user, you're on my team. And what we can do is if you press the Alt key, it brings up all of these letters and numbers that I have ignored for 10 years. But this year, I realized that if I now press any of those keys, it takes me into that spot on the ribbon. So for example, I had pressed Alt, and you can see that the home is an H. So I can press the H key on my keyboard. And now it gives me all of these other options. And so I can do any of these things, and I could say center all of my text. I could change the font. I could, what we're going to do is just press the W key now, and that's going to wrap all of our text. And so wrapping is actually something that I've seen people struggle with before, where you can make it go down within the same cell instead of overlaying into multiple cells like this one is here. But anyway, Alt H into the home key, into the home banner, and then W, and you wrapped all of those data right there. You could do that with literally anything. And so instead of using your mouse to kind of go around and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to get this one and I'll unwrap that one, you can just start to learn what these commands are, and you can do these things really, really quickly to visualize different things or change the colors. And so play around with it for a second. We won't spend too long here, but you could say do Alt H, and I could change all my font color to be white, and then you can't see anything, or whatever it is that you wanted it to be, right? So you could get through some of these things pretty quickly with just keystroke commands. Okay, so that's all the way to step 8. Can I have a thumbs up from anyone who didn't know all of those things? Okay, cool. That's great. So I'm trying to gauge what people would benefit most from here, and it seems like that's some new information to people. So that's really great. That makes me happy. All right, so now you know a couple of different ways that you can navigate through what is the equivalent to Alt on Mac. If you end up going into that link, I'll see if I can just pull it up here because I had it in my notes for today, and that is this page here, which was automateexcel.com. And this has some Excel shortcuts. And so I think instead of going into the Alt, order shortcuts, formatting shortcuts. Yeah, so these are the ones where it's Alt and then into the home, and then you can press these different buttons. So for example, if you wanted to wrap text, there isn't an actual key that you can do in Mac. And this is an example of some of the stuff that you lose when you do Macs. But you could press, if you wanted to align all your text in the center, you could press this weird key that they got there, plus E. And so hopefully these are accurate and could help some of those Mac users be able to figure out some of that stuff. Okay, quick sip of water because I'm talking real fast. Okay, let's go over to the survey tab. So this is a randomly generated data set given values between 0 and 100 for 10 questions, Q1 to 10, of 25 individuals, or sampling units. And we'll use this data set to practice restructuring data, examining the difference between, how much time do we have left? Oh, we got time, guys. Examining the difference between functions and some of Excel's more advanced tools. So I think probably everyone has seen some sort of a data table like this at some point in their careers. And you know that what you can do is underneath of it or to the side of it or whatever you want, you can start writing functions, and you could say, I want to count all of the cells that are in there. And then you could say, I want the sum of all of the cells that are in there. I want the average of all of the cells that are in, this particular question. And I want the standard deviation, which we know now is the standard deviation of our sample, not our population. So let's go ahead and take the standard deviation of that. So for anyone who might be a little bit less familiar with Excel, these are called relative references. So wherever this cell is, this cell here, it's going to, it's calculating the count based on the relative distance between this cell and those ones. So what that means is that if you grab all of these cells and you grab this little green square at the bottom corner, you see how the cursor changes to that plus. You can drag them all across, and each one of these is still going to be calculating the same thing relative to its new position, right? So that's called a relative reference in Excel. It's fun, whatever. So now we have some grouping of averages and stuff like that. But if I look at any of these things, it's really difficult to know what B4 to B28 means without actually going into this function and, oh yeah, I am getting all of the data that I wanted to. It is the column that I'm thinking of, and nothing has gone horribly wrong in terms of my calculations. So this is one way that you can do things. Let me just check my notes. But there's a better way that we can do these things. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this sheet, which is really easy to do. You can right click on the survey. You can go to move or copy. And all you have to do is create a copy and put it somewhere in the thing. But there's actually a better way that we can do this, which is if we hover over the survey sheet and we hold the control key, we can grab it by holding it with our mouse, and we can actually drag it, and that copies the sheet so that we now have an exact copy of this whole sheet. And we have our survey original, and we'll call this survey better. What we're going to do is get rid of these little things down here. We don't need them because we're going to automate a bunch of these calculations so that we can do it a lot easier. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to tell Excel that this block of text, which we can highlight the whole thing of by pressing Control and then A, that will, wherever you are in your data set, can highlight the entire block of cells that has stuff in it between it. So if we wanted to highlight this whole thing, Control A highlights all of it, which is another fun one. But we can highlight that whole thing, and we can either right click or we can press, and we're going to format it as a table. And what this does is so many cool things that make your life so much easier. So we can format as a table, and you can pick whatever colors it is that you want, or you can just press Control L when you have your data highlighted, and you can say, yes, this is the range that I have as being a whole table, and it says, okay, cool. And we get this wonderful table design tab. You can change your colors. You can say, I want it to have banded rows. You can say that it's a header row or it's not. You can, but one of the really cool things that you can do with even just a simple table like this is you can add a total row. And so with the total row, I can go down here and I can pick from a list of drop downs which function I want. So let's just say I want the average of all of these. And then I can just drag that across, and it'll take the average of all of them immediately. So it's good to have this total row. You can turn it on and off. And if you populated it and then you added some others and then you wanted to get rid of it, it'll remember the functions that you put into it. So that's one good way that we can just kind of start working with this. But one of the other good things that tables actually do that a lot of people don't realize is that if we wanted to, say, still do our silly thing where we're going to write the sum and the average underneath of it, what it does is it allows you to reference the table. So what we can do is in the table design tab, we can change the name. And so we're just going to, under table name, say that we want this to be called survey. So now this table is called survey. And what we can do in a function anywhere else in the notebook is say, I want to equal survey. And it's going to know that I want it to be that whole table, and it's going to put that value there. And so now we can pull that out. But more than just referencing the whole table, you can reference specific columns. So I can reference, I want this to be survey using square brackets, QU1. And I can say, I just want it to be that column. And more than that, you can say, I want it to be the sum of QU1, and you can automatically do that, or your average, or whatever it is that you want it to be. So that's one really good part about tables, is that it allows you to understand what it is that you're actually citing and get really close to starting to actually feel like you're coding stuff where you can say, oh, I know what survey Q1 is. That's this table and it's this column. Makes a lot of sense. Makes way more sense than B4 to B28. The other good thing that we can do is that if we type any in the column that's directly beside it, so let's just say that I want this to be sum. If we start typing beside it, it's going to recognize that this is probably part of the same table, and it's going to create a new column. And it's going to recognize that, and it's going to recognize new data that you put below it as being part of the same table, so that if I was referencing this column and I added more data below it, it'll still remember that that's all part of the same thing. And also, if anyone has ever had trouble like calculating things for large data sets at the side of, say, a thing, if you write any function in here, it will apply it to the whole column, and it will allow you to reference with this little at symbol to say that it's citing the same row that you're in. So it allows you to say, okay, so this one here is taking the sum of survey column QU1 to column QU10 in this row. And it becomes a lot easier for you to recognize what you're doing instead of saying, I'm going to take the sum of B4 to K4. And again, it starts to do that. And when you actually enter this function in, it does it. It automatically recognizes that you want to apply that for the whole thing. And then if you want to change it later and say, I want this to actually be the average instead of the sum, you can just change one of them and it'll change the whole thing. So can I get thumbs up if people are still on board here and if people are able to follow along? Cool. All right. I hope this isn't experiencing grief of hand selecting thousands of rows to copy and paste over and over. Yeah, I know. I did that too. I once had to manipulate a data set and it was just thousands of copy and paste things. But like what we're going to talk about next, Genevieve, will really blow your mind, I think, because, well, we're not going to get there yet, actually. What we're going to do is first, I wanted to show you the name manager, because the name manager is one of my favorites. And so if you go up here and you press name manager, you can open the name manager. And what this does is it tells you all of the named ranges that you have in your book. And you can essentially specify, like in coding, anyone who's done a little bit of coding knows that you can basically create objects that represent certain things. And so now you have a name survey that represents this table. And you can do that for tables, or you could do it for select ranges or specific coefficient values. And so if I said that I wanted a new value to be a constant, and I want it, you can make it represent any of these different values or some function of values, but you can also just make it be any constant. So I want it to be 3.14, will approximate pi, and that's going to be my constant. Well, I can close that, and now I can say I want this to be the sum of at this row for QU1 to this one times some constant. And now it will do that. And so it's times this constant. And I can either look at what the constant is by calling it over here, 3.14, or I can go back into my name manager, which you can, again, access by searching name manager, or you can actually use the keystroke command, which I'm clearly very excited about. And you can press Alt, I, N, D, and that brings up your name manager. So again, you can type it in the search bar, name manager, or you can press Alt, I, N, D. And that will get you back into here. And if I go into this and I change what that constant represents, say now I want it to be 6.626. I can change that. And then when I exit out of this, all of these are adjusted because they're all just based on what that constant is as I've defined it, right? So anyway, the name manager is a fun thing. Those are kind of good ways that you can start to understand what things are. And they're also ways that you can create data validation lists. So let's say that I wanted to create a dropdown that was either for eye color. And we're just going to do this ugly in this sheet just for the sake of it right now. But let's say that we wanted to be able to fill things out as being blue Red, I don't know who has red eyes, but some people do. Green, not grass. And let's say brown eyes. So we have this list that's here. We could format it as a table. Let's go ahead and do that. So either format as table up there, or we press Control L. And we have to tell it that my data has headers because it's grouped by this thing that we're calling eye color. Now we have this new table and we can rename it. So let's call this eyes just for short. And we have this table that is called eyes. And we have a single column in the table that's called eye color. What we can do is if we bring back our name manager, Alt, I, and D, we can see that we have this table here. But we can actually specify a new list that is going to allow us to create a drop down for this thing. So now we're going to call it I list. We'll call it eyes list just to be consistent there. And what it's going to be is we can either highlight all of these values, or we can actually just type out eyes square bracket eye color, because that means that it's doing the eyes table and it's taking the column eye color. Now we have this eyes list that's here. And so anywhere else that we want, we can write eyes list and it'll pop up. And this is, again, just the naming stuff. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a new column here that says eye color. And we're going to, we can see that it automatically populates for this table. And let's say that these eye colors represent each of these individuals that have filled out this survey. But we don't want to be able to write that somebody has white eyes or brawn or, I don't know, some sort of weird thing in here. We want to only be able to use the colors that we specify. And so what we can do is we can highlight this whole column. We can go to data and we can say, I want you to validate my entry into this column so that it only allows me to do the list that we've already specified. And so we can say here, we want it to be a list and it can only equal eyes underscore list. We press OK, and now you see that this drop down has popped up here. And now we can only enter blue, green, red, or whatever. And if you try and enter that somebody has white eyes, it says, no, 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 we don't like that. And that's a great way, like data validation has honestly changed a lot of the way that I work with data in most of my career, because you can really, if you're working with assistants, if you're working with your own data entry, it could prevent so many issues. And you can do data validation for not just, say, eye color, but also for numbers. So say in this column, QU1 all the way to QU10, we know that all of these values are between 0 and 100. So we can create data validation that is a whole number between 0 and 100. So now, if I try and enter 50 into this cell, it's going to be like, all right, that's cool. But if I try and enter 101, it's going to be like, not allowed. And that will prevent me from, say, entering, I don't know, this type of thing in there. It says you can't enter text. It doesn't match with the data restrictions. And you can't enter negative numbers. You can only put the right thing in the place where it needs to be. And that is one of the key things with managing any type of data that you're doing in Excel. When it comes to these drop-down lists too, it's a lot of fun because you can actually update these. So if I were to say, now I've met someone who has white eyes, I can add that to this list because I've done it in this table format. And because I've entered a new value below it in the table, it recognizes that that's still part of eye color, eyes, eye color column. So now I can put white in there. So you can adjust these things and make them really like versatile and functional to be able to really facilitate a lot of your data entry stuff. So that's one of the other skills that I was hoping that we could talk about today. And I think just to summarize at this point, a little bit of where we've gone through the name manager, we've gone through format as table, and we've talked a little bit about data validation. We're going to jump a little bit over a few of these functions, and we'll see if we can get to those later. But we're going to kind of start with some of these really cool tools, including pivot tables and Power Query now. So we're coming back to Survey Better. We're going to delete that. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to delete iColor. So we're basically just back at this original survey data that we had before. Let's say that we had 13,000 respondents, right? We don't want to have to mess around with that. We don't want to have to mess around with trying to calculate things. Sometimes we don't even want to just write functions. We want to be able to just have Excel be able to automate a lot of these things for us. So we can use some of the cool tools that Excel has to be able to actually do that. And my absolute new favorite tool is indeed Power Query. And so what we can do is there's been these buttons here your whole life, and you've maybe never touched them before, but we're going to get into them now because they are super cool. So if you get to this get and transform data thing and you go from table arranged, you can click that. Especially if you're on this table. If you're a Mac, there's a couple of weird ways that you have to kind of finagle into it. But I think what it is if you go to get data from file, from Excel workbook, and then you basically navigate to this table. But if you're a Windows user, you can press this from table arrange, or you can just press Control or right click anywhere on the table and go to get data from table arrange. When you do that, it takes you into this whole new user experience where there is, similar to the rest of Excel, these things on the top that let you do stuff. And there's a list on the side that has all these queries. And there's a list here that has some of the details of your query. There's a bar at the top that says exactly what it's doing in terms of code. And then there's a preview of what your data looks like here. You can't actually edit any of these cells, but what it's doing is it's taking it from that Excel spot and it's loading it into this user interface where anyone who's familiar with like tidyverse and R, you can do pretty much anything that you can do in tidyverse in Excel in Power Query. So very important stuff. We're going to call this, so we have a wide data set here for our quiz. What we're going to do is we're going to change that to a long data set. So in the properties here, we're going to say this is going to become survey_long. We're just going to go ahead and press enter there. You'll see that it updates over here. And if you had other queries, it would show that it's there. You can duplicate them. You can rename them from there. You can do advanced editor, which lets you do actually coding stuff, but we don't need any of that because this is a really user intuitive area. And what we really want to do is we want to change this from being a wide data set to being a long data set so that we can use some of these tools to just group by things and automatically analyze them. So what we do is we press up on QU1. Can I just have a quick show of hands? Is there anyone who's not here and wants to be and is just desperately struggling right now? I'm so sorry, Pablo. Okay. There's only a couple of folks. Oh, we're getting more. Okay. So there's a few people that are struggling right now with being able to get into this thing. I'm going to go back. I'm just going to exit out of here. I'm going to discard my changes and I'm going to run through this again and hopefully, yeah, okay, wicked. We'll go through this again to just to get the data into Power Query. So what we want to be is if we have this data tab right at the top, we're on our survey better data, and this table is called survey. From this tab, if we select get data or from table or range, it pulls it into here. Or we can right click on the table and we can say get data from table or range. I'm going to wait maybe a minute here, just in case some people are finagling with things to try and get caught up here. If anyone has a specific issue, maybe throw it into the chat and I'll see if I can answer it. But for anyone who's already in Power Query, try and see if you can figure out how to get it from the wide to the long on your own, and we'll come back to it together. Okay, I'm not seeing if anyone's putting anything into the chat to see if there's any specific issues. As another note, this is recorded. So you will be able to go back through here and work through this book again. And my students have loved the recordings because then you could stop it and be like, what is this again? And then work through it again together with that. So if you are struggling, again, these are some of the more advanced tools. If you can even get to the point of using just the tables and some data validation, like that will vastly improve your ability to do stuff. I'm seeing some hands down now. I'm not sure if that means that you've given up, which I apologize. But I think we'll, in the interest of time, we'll try working through the Power Query and we'll see if we can get there. Instead of maybe hands up for struggling right now, can I get hands up for people who are in Power Query and are ready to go? All right, I'm seeing a critical mass here. Pablo, you got in. Awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah. All right. So we're in Power Query. We've, again, either gone to this data tab, we've said get data and we've loaded it in. We've gone from table or range, or we've right-clicked and said get data from table or range. We're in here now. Again, we have this banner at the top that allows us to do a whole bunch of different stuff. We have this list of all of our queries on the side. We have a formula bar, which has some fancy code that we don't really need to understand. And we have this list of things on the side. And the reason that I say that these can help us make reproducible science is that everything that you do in Power Query is tracked. You can change the name of them, and it will record each one of these steps so that you can go back in and someone who gets your book can say, what did I do? Or what did you do with this book, and be able to actually track through these things. So what we're going to do is highlight QU1, and we're going to hold the Shift key and use the right arrow to highlight all of our question columns. We want to leave ID alone because that one is our sampling unit. And as we remember from our long tables, we want to have the sampling unit repeated multiple times. So we have all of these columns highlighted. Again, all I did was I started clicking QU1 at the top here. That highlights the whole column. You hold the Shift key and you press the right arrow to highlight all of these other columns until you have all of the question columns highlighted. From that point, what we're going to do is transform it. So we head up to this transform tab here. And we go to unpivot columns. Now we have something that looks a lot more like this long data set that we were hoping to work with, right? So we know that this is not actually called attribute. What we want this to be is our question, right? Because we have question 1 all the way through to 10. And we have our sampling units, 1 repeated 10 times with each one of these questions, and then the value beside it. So if you look at this, it's showing you that we have 250 rows, and it's showing us all of this stuff together. If you wanted to, we could do our analysis to condense this and get our summary stats in Power Query. But and that would just be through, for anyone who's maybe jumping ahead, using this group by. And we might come back to it later if we have a little bit of time. But anyone who's done a little bit of tidyverse coding or something like that, basically you can group by each one of these questions and then apply functions to the values. So if you wanted to group by question 1, you could condense everything by the questions, and it'll show you question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you can apply, say, the sum or the average to all of the values that are for each one of those questions. But there's another tool that I wanted to cover with Excel that scares a lot of people that we can do a little bit easier, perhaps. So we will close, and all we have to do to get out of this strange interface that we've entered into in the Power Query editor is press, oh, I forgot to call this survey long. We just want to make sure that it has the name that we want, because it's going to create a table that's named that thing. And so we want to make sure that it's called survey underscore long. To get out of here, all we have to do is press close and load, and it will do this really cool thing where this query, this manipulation that we've done to the data, is linked to this table. If you do any changes to this table, it will apply them in this table, which is super cool. So let's just say that I now have another respondent let's just say I have another 25 respondents. So I'm going to copy and paste all of this data down to here, and I'm going to drag this down so I have another 50. This is, you don't have to do this part. Again, I'm just showing you that I now have double the amount of data in this table, which if I was calculating things manually would screw everything up. But because we've used a query, this table is related to it. At this point, we still only have 25, but all you have to do is right click it and say refresh. And then it's going to add those 25 other respondents into this table. Can I have a thumbs up if people are still following along? Okay, I'm seeing a few. That's good. Go through here a little bit. I'm seeing a lot, actually. That's awesome. All right. So I think we're pretty good. We understand that this table, which is formatted as a table, it says survey long up here. You can even change the colors if you really wanted to. It doesn't really matter. Is a query. What we can also do is if we said, oh, I actually did something wrong, I want to go in here, or I want to even just see how it was here, you can go to this queries and connections tab, or you can do the query tab and press edit, and you can go back into the query editor and you can edit these things. You can also rename each of the steps. Like you can do a whole bunch of stuff in this process that makes it so that someone can come in from your original data table, see exactly how you manipulated it, and then update it as you're adding more data. You can automate so much stuff this way, and it's been a real game changer for me in terms of like trying to figure out how to do stuff without altering that first table. So anyway, that's where we're at in terms of excitation here. I assume everyone is equally as excited about this as I am. Thank you very much. But now we're going to practice one of the other tools that we have. So if we go up to the Insert tab, there's been this pivot table option here the whole time. Pivot tables are really only useful if you are using long data sets. If you're using wide data sets, you can't really do much with it. But if you're using a long data set where it knows that, okay, you have your questions, and these are some sort of categorical thing. You have your IDs indicating which ones are linked, and then you have the values for each one of those. You can do some really cool stuff. So for anyone who's never used a pivot table before, we're going to try it here. We can press pivot table when we're on anywhere on this table, and it opens up this thing here. It gives us a few options. So it says, what's the table or range? And right now it knows that, oh, you probably want to bring in survey long because you were clicked on one of those cells. You can tell it where you want the pivot table to be placed, whether it's in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. And we're going to say just a new worksheet because we have our rule, right? One sheet, one table. And we're going to go ahead and do that. So we press OK. And now we have this blank pivot table. Well, that was anticlimactic. It didn't really do anything. But what we know is that we have these different columns in our table. So let's just say that we want to summarize by question. We can either click this little checkbox and it'll put it somewhere, or we can drag it down to exactly where we want it to be. And so if we wanted to say filter, and let's just say we wanted to filter out some of the IDs because we don't like whoever ID number whatever was, what we can do is if we pull ID into filters, we can filter by and exclude certain things. But all you have to do is the little drop down, select multiple items, and you can exclude certain people that might have participated. But you can just click on the tick box for the question, and then just click on the tick box for value. And what it is doing is it is saying that we have this table here, and you have 10 different options for question. So I'm going to give you all of the different options for question. I'm going to take all of the values that you have that are associated with that question. And what I think that you want from it as a pivot table is the sum, because that's the most sensible thing that it can do with a bunch of numbers. It can add them all together. But what we can do is we can actually change which function that we want this to be. So if I said, I don't actually want it to be the sum, you click on this little drop down here, the little downward arrow, you say value field settings, and it gives you a bunch of different options that you can do with it. And so if I didn't want it to be the sum, but I wanted it to be the average score for each one of these questions, I could select average, and now it's going to give me the average of each of those values. And if we look all the way back to this first thing, you'll notice that each of these are the exact same value as that one, which is a coincidence because it's just because I duplicated it. But anyway, we're able to summarize a bunch of values here. And the reason that I do it this way, even though it took us 45 minutes to get to this pivot table, is because I've been drawing on for the whole time. But in this one, if something happened to this formula, it'd be a lot harder to tell than it would be to understand that you started from this table and you pulled it into Power Query, and then you were able to summarize it as a pivot table. And all of these things are related to one another. So if you edit the data in this table, it's going to edit this output in the Power Query. And just as a proof, I will change question 3 to being 100 for all of the answers. And then what it does is, because this is the table that our query is referencing, I can refresh the query, and it refreshes all of QU3 as being value of 100. And then if I refresh our pivot table by right-clicking and going to refresh, it now recognizes that all of those are there. And so this is, again, a way where you can get to some reproducible science that's associated with trackable tools that you can use in Excel. And this is a really simple data set that we're starting from in terms of this survey. But you can obviously get to a lot more complicated stuff. And even using just simple tools in Excel, you can do some pretty complex analyses. And so that's kind of the first little bit of, we've got about 20 minutes left in our time here. So now we have covered data management basics all the way up to data validation. We haven't quite gotten to those functions yet, but there are notes available in the PowerPoint. And we've covered pivot tables and Power Query. The next thing that I'm hoping to cover, so is there, I think I'll ask now, is there anyone who wants to put a particular issue that they had doing this into the chat, or anything that you wanted repeated? I tried to slow down a little bit and go back through some stuff, but we got a few extra minutes here before we get into the last couple tools that I want to discuss. If anyone wants to ask a quick question or anything like that. Jamona, we do have until 4:30, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. How did you refresh the Power Query with the new 100 value? Excellent question. So I changed all the values in our original data source table. I can actually yeah. So I changed all of the values here, Control C and down. And then what I did was I went to the query, and I right-clicked anywhere on the query, or you can do it in the query tab, and you just press refresh. And what that does is it says, okay, I'm going to rerun all that code that we came up with in the Power Query editor on that table again. And it updates all those values. And then the same thing, QU3 this is the average that it had computed before, but we can go to pivot table analyze, and press refresh, or we can right click and press refresh. Can you work us through how to perform calculations across multiple Excel sheets that are open at the same time? Ooh. Okay, well, Excel sheets at the same time. That's an interesting question. I'm not really sure about that one, but I think for what we're doing for today, that might be a little bit outside of our realm. I think in terms of getting things across multiple sheets, this kind of linking between tables is one of the key tools that would help you be able to do those things. And as well as trying to name those ranges. So again, utilizing each one of these tools together, you can do a whole bunch of really cool stuff. Like if you were to name ranges, you could adjust those, and that would populate things in other sheets. So you can kind of pair these things across sheets to be able to do some really complex stuff. I hope that answers your question. But I think what we'll do is move on to one of the other tools that I wanted to discuss with you guys. So, can I get a thumbs up for anyone who's able to go ahead and get into the iris table? All right, cool. So for those of you who are getting a little bit tired, um, there is again some more instructions. I don't think we're going to get to two of the tools today. I think what we'll do is maybe finish up with this one and see if we might want to try the last tool. But the next tool that I wanted to show to you is the data analysis tool pack. So what this does is it allows you to basically run a suite of tools to do some actual complex statistics in Excel. So in order to access this, if you don't have this, if you go to the data tab and it doesn't say data analysis exactly like this on the side of it, you don't have it loaded. So it should be downloaded on most updated versions of Excel, but what you can do is you can go to your File tab. We press File. We go to Options. And we go to Add-ins. We make sure that we're on Excel add-ins and we press Go. And we just have to make sure that this analysis tool pack is ticked. If it's not ticked, you'll see that I don't have data analysis in my data tab here. But all we have to do is, if you don't have that, is again, File, Options, Add-ins, Excel add-ins, and tick this box. Now it's there. Is there anyone who doesn't have that in their options? Because that I can imagine there's probably a few people that maybe don't have it downloaded in their version of Excel, but from my understanding, it's available in all of the modern versions of Excel. And can I get a thumbs up from some people who have it loaded and have this button available to them? I didn't see anyone who didn't have the option who's looking. Okay. So I think we're probably still on the same track. There's at least a few people keeping along here. Oh, there's lots of thumbs up. That's cool. It's called, so one more time, we go to File, Options, Add-ins, Excel add-ins, and Analysis Tool Pack. And we just got to make sure that that one's ticked. So we have this set here, which is an example data set that is from the R statistical environment called iris. And these are basically the petal lengths in centimeters of two different species of iris, Iris setosa and Iris virginica. They are just flowers with these big, pretty flowers on them. The first thing that I always do when I'm working with a data set like this is format it as a table. And again, we can do that by format as a table up here, or by Control L in our keystroke commands from anywhere in the table. So again, format as table, and you can pick whatever colors you want. Or you can press Control L on the table itself. So we have this table. We're going to call it Iris, which is a good practice to make sure that you're naming all these things so we could reference them later. And if we wanted to, we could start to calculate all of the descriptive statistics that we want. But there is one of these wonderful data analysis tools that we can use to do that. So we're going to leave our cell here, and we're going to click on data analysis. And you'll see that there are all of these options in here for things that you can do in terms of simple statistics and even some more complex statistics. But so there's like ANOVAs, you can do F tests, T tests, Z tests, regressions, whatever it is that you want, and it'll give you a pretty cool output for them. But let's just go with this descriptive statistics for a very simple thing to do. So let's click on descriptive statistics, and then we click OK. So again, for anyone who might have fallen behind there, I click on data analysis. I click on descriptive statistics, and I press OK. Now it has all of these options of things that I can do. So in terms of the input range, we could go ahead and just press this whole table. And all I did was press here and press Control A. You can drag and highlight this whole thing. any way that you can get all of that table identified in this thing. We want it to group our data by columns because it's a wide data set and we have different things in each of the columns. And we want it to know that it has the labels in the first row because our column headers are actual names of the things. The next thing that we do is we tell it where we want it to output and what we want it to output. So we say our output range, we're just going to put it beside, and we're going to break my rule for now of just putting it beside so that we can see it. So we click this output range, we click into this cell here, and we tell it we want it to output over here. Last thing we need to do is tell it what we want, and we can click these summary statistics. And all we got to do is press OK. And then you can see that it pumped out all of these numbers immediately for this kind of large set of data. And I didn't have to write any functions. It's a repeatable thing where you can basically redo that data analysis over the whole thing. It keeps your options in there and you can put it over there and overwrite this data. But essentially, it allows you to really quickly get a lot of information about your data set, whether it's, the means between these two groups or the medians, the modes, the number of points in it, all these different aspects of your data set can be summarized pretty quickly using this one simple tool. And the example that I use with my students is I make them do t-tests using this tool in Excel to see if there are statistically significant differences between these two populations. So that's just one example of the data analysis tool pack. But if you do look at it, there are all sorts of different things. One of the examples that we don't have time for today would be doing a linear regression and looking at the output with Toronto weather data. So perhaps you could take a look at that and maybe try it on your own time using some of the tools that we've talked about today. I think my voice is just about fried here. So we might end a little bit early there, but I hope that this has been, I can sense that there's some energy fading from the room. And I've been drawing on for the last 80 minutes. And so I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I hope that this has been really helpful for you guys. And I hope that you learned something. I hope that maybe you take away some of these things, even if it's just a little bit of excitement about some of these tools that are available. So the recording will be available on the SCB website. And if you do go into the PowerPoint, there are a few notes about how you can do some of the other examples. So one of the tools that we didn't get to was Power Pivot, but that's a little bit longer for the time. Essentially, you can check it out in this thing and see if it's one of the tools that you might want to learn. I hope that you're excited about some of these things, and I wish you all a great rest of your day.